Hello, Andrew Kolsky with Therapy BTS, Therapy Behind the Scenes. And we have an unusual type of guest today, something really exciting that I was really happy to be involved with. This is Jake Pugh. He is from My Three-Chambered Heart in Goochland, Virginia. Jake and I had a chance to work together briefly. We'll talk about that. But Jake, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
All right, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, my name is Jake. Along with my wife Elizabeth and our son Hendrix, we run a reptile educational group out of Central Virginia. Um, since December of last year, so since December of 2023, we have finally had our museum open. That's kind of the centerpiece of what we do. We've been doing outreach work for quite a few years, taking reptiles out to different educational facilities, whether it was schools or working with a lot of homeschool groups, or sometimes just social community events, and doing a lot of outreach work there. But we realized that we could reach a wider base and we can show more things if we had a facility. So we took about 2.5 years and we put a lot of work into what I think is a pretty unique thing that we're able to offer now. So we do have a reptile natural history museum. You'll see a little bit of that behind me here. And yeah, that's just what we do. We're reptile lovers. We like to breathe a little life into the science. Sometimes the really cool stuff can be lost if you're just reading it flat on a page. So what we try to do here is introduce the animals to people. For the people that love reptiles, specifically snakes, we got you covered. You're good. Just come in the door. We've got it here. For those who are a little unsure or maybe just a little undereducated, which tends to be most people, that's sort of the direction we've tried to take with this. So we try to be as wide open as we can and accommodating as we can to all different audiences. And I'm excited to do this. Maybe we'll reach a few more people today too.
Great, great. Well, thanks for that intro. It's well, you're there on the reptile lover end, and I know what you have there because I've seen your facility, but I have the privilege, I guess, of working with people who may have some fears related to
Sure.
reptiles. And there's some people have that sort of I'll call it an ick factor because I don't know what else to call it, because they've never touched a snake. They never have interacted. So they have these assumptions that it's going to be this slimy, weird type of thing, and they're actually not. So education centers like yours are really important so that people get the opportunity to learn. And when you do learn, you find out there's some pretty cool stuff about reptiles that we would not know and that you educated me about that I didn't know. So, we're lucky to have people like you out there. So, while many people are kind of afraid of snakes and things as they grow up, you tended to gravitate towards them. Tell us about how you first got involved with reptiles.
Sure. So growing up in Northern Virginia, the yearly school field trip was typically to the National Zoo in DC. That was really my only exposure to reptiles. This would have been at a time where it was just slightly pre-internet. So you could find the occasional books at the school libraries, but it was very slim pickings. There weren't a lot of things there. Even as a kid, I would pick up on how some of the books, while everything's got something that you can learn from, it wasn't uncommon for me to pick up a book about poisonous snakes, when, if we're being technical about it, snakes could be venomous, but very, very few are truly poisonous. So it was tricky to find the information that I wanted. I can remember always wanting more information. I don't remember a time of discovery. So whatever my first exposure to reptiles, and I know for me, the entry point into the world of reptiles were snakes. So whatever that early exposure was, it got in really early and really deep. So I don't have a moment of I saw the snake and the world opened up to me. It must have happened much earlier than that. And I can give you a slightly longer answer to that if you would like. I think that maybe someone in your position would find this to be interesting.
Sure.
So I didn't get a chance to meet my biological father until I was 37. So I just turned 40. So 2.5 years ago, I met him for the first time.
Wow.
And we had a conversation, and we were trying to find common ground, as you would imagine that we would. And other than some general things, nothing was really lining up. I looked a lot like him, which that kind of answered some questions because I never looked like anyone in my family. I'm like, okay, so I look like him, but maybe that's all I got from him. And then he was asking what I did, and I was explaining at that time we were just starting to build out the museum. So what I said to him was, I'm working on a museum. We do herpetology education. So herpetology is technically the study of reptiles and amphibians. What our work mostly is on the reptile side of things, but because of how the science is related, you kind of can't talk about one without the other. So the vocabulary and the verbiage that I happened to use in this conversation with him was that I was opening a herpetology museum. If you don't know reptiles, if it's not your world, you probably don't know the term herpetology. So he kind of went quiet over the phone, and then he came back with, when he was a boy, his dream was to be a herpetologist.
Oh,
And his current wife and his other child, so I have a half sister that I met along the way. They didn't know this about him because that was such a it was a dream he let go a long time ago. But apparently growing up, his first dream, which if we think about it, kind of the way that we go through the different phases of life, maybe the most genuine and the purest forms of our ideas and thoughts and dreams and aspirations happen when we're kids before the world tells us what we can and can't do. So
mhm.
his most genuine dream in life was to be a herpetologist, which he had never told anyone. And apparently it's been genetic all the time. All this time, it's just been a genetic thing, but I didn't know it. So somewhere between what was sitting in the genes and whatever I would have caught early enough in life, it just kind of swelled and became what I do today.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So, so are you telling us that you personally never had any sort of fear or anything of snakes, or did you start off with some kind of fear, but you got over it? How did you approach it?
I never had a fear of snakes before meeting before meeting my biological father. The Because I would get this question a lot, like,
Mhm.
and also I worked a lot throughout my 20s in various blue collar jobs. I was in a lot of different warehouses, and because of that, I worked with a lot of different immigrants from all different parts of the world. And in most parts of the world, it is a genuine, maybe necessary fear of snakes. Necessary in the sense of the guys that I worked with from Peru, or the guys that I worked with from various parts of Africa, including Ghana and Cameroon, um, when they talk about the snakes in their backyard, it wasn't a 5 foot long black snake like we would find in Virginia. My Peruvian friends had green anacondas not far from their house. So that's what might have been eating the family dog. It wasn't something that was going to raid the chicken nest. They had some major concerns. Or my friends from Sierra Leone, or from some of the other countries in Africa, their native uh, their native hometowns um, were part of the native range of black mambas. And so they had some significantly dangerous reptiles to be concerned about. So to them, they couldn't understand how I could bring a snake into my house, or they just couldn't, it didn't make any sense to them at all.
Mhm.
I never had any of that. I did meet people who had these different backgrounds, and so I could understand where they were coming from with it. It maybe helped me get a unique perspective to do what I do now, where it's not just someone thinks that they're icky, though there's a lot of that. But in some cases, it's a real fear to have, or at least a real concern. Maybe fear is not the right word, but a real concern to be aware of.
Mhm.
I never had any of that. I just it was something that I was always comfortable around. I didn't grow up. Uh, I didn't grow up around a lot of woods. There wasn't a lot of nature around me. So I didn't get the opportunities to just go out and explore, which might have fed the passion because I didn't get to do it. I just got to sit and think about it. Um, and what I used to tell people, because they would ask me a lot, especially the friends that I had that were from other parts of the world where they couldn't comprehend what I was doing and what I was into, um, they would kind of press me for a real answer, not just I like snakes, because that didn't exist in their world. So they wanted to know what happened to me. It had to be a thing that happened to me to be comfortable around reptiles and specifically snakes. So in trying to find an answer for them, as silly as it sounds, for years, what I figured was this. My name is Jake. For anyone born in the mid 1980s, like I was, there weren't as many Jakes back then as there are now. I hear a lot more Jakes now, but it used to be a very uncommon name. And at that time, there was a very famous professional wrestler named Jake the Snake. So if your name was Jake in the 1980s, your go-to nickname was Jake the Snake. And so in trying to put together an answer for this question I was getting a lot, I assumed, well, I must have just made a positive connection between Jake and Snake, and I put it together. And to me, it was never a negative thing, and I just went with it. Um, Maybe there's still some truth to that, along with finding out that it was genetic all along. But somewhere in all of that is what I ended up with today. But there was no hesitation or fear. It was just something that was a natural thing for me to flow into.
Wow. Wow. That's great. That's a great story. And it makes it we need people like you to be able to educate others of us like me who started off scared of snakes. Now I'm past a lot of it. I still have a
Okay.
certain degree of trepidation, but
Yeah.
I learned a lot. Um, there's I will share that there are a lot of interesting things that someone will learn if they visit your museum. I'm not going to give it all away, but I learned a lot of really interesting things. But one of the things that you mentioned already on the podcast, and I just want to kind of address it, is you said there's a difference between poisonous and venomous. Now, I never
Yeah.
even thought about that. Can you share more of what does that mean in relation to snakes?
Sure. So venomous is when an animal has a toxin and they have a means of putting it into you. So for certain snakes, and there are more than 4,000 unique species of snakes, there are something like maybe only 400 species that are venomous, and most of those are not medically significant. So I've met a lot of people who feel that all snakes must be venomous. That's just kind of the connections that were made for them. So most snakes are not venomous, but those that are, they have a toxin, and because of their fangs, they have a means of putting it in you. Spiders would also have the same way. Bees and scorpions have stingers, so they're also venomous because they can put their toxin into you. Poison is when an animal, in my world, most commonly, I point to the amphibians, frogs, newts, toads, some toads, salamanders. They've got a toxin either in them or more commonly on their skin, but they have no means of putting it in you. So if a frog bites you, nothing happens. But if you lick or bite the wrong frog, you could get sick. So an amphibian would be poisonous, a snake would be venomous. Snow White's apple would be poisonous. You put that apple on a table, it can't do anything to you. But if you pick it up and you bite it, well, you're going to go to sleep for a long time. So that's the difference in poisonous and venomous. What is neat though is there are a couple of exceptions. There always are, and that stuff is it's really fun to get into once we understand the what the rules are. We get to understand the cool animals that break the rules. So, for example, I might have pointed this out to you during your visit. The common garter snake. Most garter snakes, technically, they are venomous. It's a rather recent finding. Venom is just a type of modified saliva. So we are finding that more reptiles are venomous than we used to think. The reason that we didn't associate them as being venomous before or even think to look for it is because it doesn't affect us. And of course, humans, we kind of base everything off of ourselves first and then outward from there. And it makes sense. We got to start somewhere. But because garter snake bites don't have any ill effect on a human. We didn't really consider them before. Technically, they're a venomous snake, um, but they are designed to prey upon a lot of amphibians, and they built up natural resistance to amphibian poisons. If a garter snake were to eat a toxic, let's say a toxic frog, and while it's still digesting the toxins and processing the toxins of that frog, if something like a bird comes along and eats the garter snake, it could now potentially get sick or even die from what were the frog poisons, but it's inside the snake. So if we're following all the technical definitions of poisonous and venomous, certain snakes like garter snakes can be both venomous and, depending on what they ate last, poisonous as well.
Very interesting. That was one of the interesting facts I learned, along with many others. Like I said, I'm not gonna give it all away because there's a lot of interesting things to learn. But another question that I do have as we're talking about venomous is, oftentimes when people have this fear of snakes, they have this assumption that if I see a snake, all snakes are out there just waiting for the chance to bite me. What is the
Right.
reality? Are there snakes out there that are waiting to bite people, or what's the reality?
There are no snakes waiting to bite you. As with anything, there are snakes that are maybe their natural disposition is to be a little grumpier than most. Most snakes are just kind of hanging out. If you come across them, they're either not too aware of you being there, or they're just hoping you pass on by. Snakes are not preying upon humans, even the largest snakes in the world. They're not designed to be able to eat most humans. That comes down to the unique angle of the human shoulders. Our shoulders are too wide for most humans to be swallowed. When you occasionally hear about a giant snake having swallowed a person, it's either a person very, very young and their shoulders are very narrow, or very, very old and their shoulders have shrunken down to be very narrow. So even the largest snakes in the world are not looking at humans as being meals. Most snakes are not waiting to bite people. It If you're coming across a snake, probably that snake is out basking, and as such, they've not really reached the full charge for the day. So that snake likely was aware that you were approaching it and just didn't have the built up energy reserve to get away in time, which is the only reason you would have found it in the first place.
Hmm.
In that case, you might be startling the animal. Um, Probably as soon as it can, it's going to get away from you as quickly as possible. A story that I hear quite often here in Central Virginia, where people have a lot of land and they've got these big, wide open yards that they've got to mow or they've got to keep clear. People will tell me about instances that they've had where snakes are coming after them, and they know it to be true. The snake is coming after me. It happened yesterday in my yard. The snake was coming after me. The snakes are not coming after you. Um, there are some snakes that are a little more brazen than others, but what is happening in those situations almost every single time is you're approaching the animal during a point in the day, especially if there's nothing else around you. So if you're in the middle of a big yard or a big field, uh, if it's a nice, bright, sunny day, the reason the snake is even there for you to come across in the first place is they're out there basking. They're either charging up in the sun so that they can digest the meal, or they're charging up in the sun so that they can hunt later on that night. If you come across them, then if the snake is startled, it's going to want to look for the closest dark thing to hide under or hide inside of, and that would be your shadow. So if the
Hmm.
snake charges you, it's not charging you, it's charging you because the only dark place around, or at least the closest one, is the shadow that's behind you, which means as you turn, you continue to put the shadow behind yourself. So it looks like the snake is coming after you. It absolutely is not. As silly as that sounds, that is what's going on. Snakes are not, they're not coming after you. I promise. Even if they did, most of them can't pose a threat to a human, but it's not what they're wired to do. What they're wired to do is to look for the first and closest dark place to go hide under, and then just wait for the scary thing to go away.
Hmm. So am I correct, and I may not be, am I correct to assume then that if I were to encounter a snake, and I had some sort of an interaction with the snake. The snake would probably either be trying to defend itself to get me away from it, or if I were a rodent or something, it would come at me because I look like a meal. But other than those two situations, it probably wants nothing to do with me at all.
Yeah, they want nothing to do with us at all. We are too big to be prey really for any of the snakes except maybe the largest ones. But again, we're not the right shape or size. We don't have the right texture to our skin. Human skin seems to be a little too oily for most reptiles. It can almost be insulting sometimes. I've not been bitten very often at all by any of my animals, but it has happened on occasion. And every single time it's happened with a snake, as soon as I peel them off of me, because snakes, a defensive strike is basically them pushing you away. You're almost as likely to get a headbutt from them as an actual open mouth strike. But of course, it's so fast, you can't react to it either way. Um, but if a snake does actually latch on, by the time I peel them off, they start visually gagging. And a lot of that is the oils on our skin
Hmm.
are apparently very nasty to the reptiles. So, yeah, you peel a snake off of you, and then they spend about 30 or 60 seconds just trying to spit you out as much as they can. Um, so they're not coming after us. They're not mistaking us. Occasionally, if you in my case, if I've been handling some rodents, it doesn't happen often. But of course, if I'm feeding the snakes, I'm pretty careful about washing my hands and staying clean and not smelling like food. But if I were to smell like food, the snake might, because also not only would I smell like food, but I'd be warm and there's a heartbeat, so the snake might be a little confused for the moment because most of the boxes are checked. It doesn't look like food, but it smells like food and it's warm like food and there's a heartbeat like food. So a mistake could be made. But if you just happen to come across one, if you're not actively working with them all the time like I am, your chances of truly being even struck at are very, very small. Most snakes are not going to strike first and foremost. They'll strike if they feel countered, but they'd much rather get away. So, in that same time that you're going to take a step back, they're going to lunge the other way and try to get away. If you try to counter the snake, they might bow up, they might assume a defensive posture. Even then, most snakes, even dangerous ones, and again, most snakes are not dangerous, but even dangerously venomous snakes would much rather scare you off by their big, impressive size, or in the case of, say, a rattlesnake rattling the tail, they'd much rather not have to strike because there's a lot of energy exerted. Reptiles have very little endurance relative to mammals, so it's not something that they want to waste their precious energy on. So they don't want to strike at you. They don't really want to get you. They just want you to have enough distance so they can get away. And that's really all that's going on. Doesn't always feel that way in the moment, but if you can kind of center yourself a bit and just go, okay, um, if I take a step back this way, they're going to go that way, and I'll never see it again. That's most scenarios.
Right, right. Well, I do want to share for the audience two little stories of things that I got to experience related to that. Is one of them, we were shooting video of the different snakes in different situations, and one of them, there's this little skinny little snake, and Jake was putting his hand in the enclosure with the snake, and the snake was, it looked like it was trying to strike at him, but then he explained to me that he's just headbutting him, trying to warn him to go away, leave me alone. So it was really interesting to watch this snake kind of headbutt your hand, kind of like saying
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
So that was one story. The other one that I found really interesting, you were talking about, the food and the heat that the snake is recognizing, and we were doing some feeding of the snakes, and there was one particular snake we were feeding some mice, and the mice that Jake has were they come frozen, they're not live, and he was holding the mouse up with some tongs, and the snake went to strike, but the snake went and it struck between where the mouse was and where Jake's hand was, and I'm like, why did he miss? It was so obvious, it was right there. And Jake was explaining because he's going for the heat. So those were two really interesting things that I never would have known.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you, as with anything, there are some general things to learn about them. Snakes can, I guess anything can be as complicated and involved and intricate as you would want to make it. But if you learn a couple of just general basic functions of how they work, all of a sudden these kind of mysterious, unpredictable behaviors become very predictable and not so mysterious. It's like, oh, it's as much as I love them, they're still pretty basic organisms. So where's the warm thing? They're going to go to the warm thing. Where's the thing that smells like food? That might be the secondary attempt. But yeah, it's once you learn how to read them, it's not such a thing. But it is neat the first time you experience it for sure.
Yeah, because I'd never noticed that before.
Yeah.
So let's talk snakes and therapy for a minute here.
Yeah.
Um, you shared with me that you've had the opportunity in the past to work with a therapist who had a client who had phobia of snakes. Um, tell us about that. How was it? What happened? What'd you do?
So through one of the during the pandemic, uh, we focused a lot on working with homeschool groups, and because for a little while, everything in the academic world for kids kind of went homeschool. So one of the students that we had, her father was a therapist, and he had a doctor in his office who had a patient who had a pretty severe phobia of snakes, Ophidiophobia, I guess would be the technical term for it. It wasn't all reptiles, it was specifically snakes. It's maybe the most common reptile related phobia. So they asked me if I would be up for bringing some live snakes into the office and just kind of having a little bit of exposure therapy. They didn't really know how it was going to go because they had never done anything like that before, but they were confident with my handling of the animals and they were confident with my presentation with the animals. Um, if your only exposure to reptiles has been what you would see on TV or maybe with more recent times on YouTube videos, it does not make for a very exciting video or a television show to see actual real reptile energy and reptile handling. Like anything else, reptiles have an energy and they react to the energy around them. And so if you're calm, they're calm most of the time. There's a couple of exceptions, but even then, if you read the animal the right way, if you treat it as what it is and not trying to make it something that it's not. So as long as you're not expecting, say, an alligator to act like your puppy dog, then if you let it be an alligator, you can still work within the confines of what its moods and behaviors and all of that would be. So if you're only accustomed to what is presented, the exciting videos are of people typically handling snakes in a way that makes them more aggressive because you put some exciting music behind that, and now you've got something that's going to get a lot of clicks or views or ratings or whatever it is. Real life snake handling is a pretty calm, relaxed, almost boring to the outsider activity. So because I handle reptiles appropriately, and in these classes I was teaching the kids how to handle reptiles appropriately, they were confident that I wasn't going to add any additional stress with the patient. So I was asked to come in, and I brought a number of snakes in. I believe I brought a corn snake, which is a very common colubrid. They're similar to most people are familiar with rat snakes, and if you're in Virginia, you would have black rat snakes, but rat snakes are all over the world. So corn snakes are a type of red rat snake. I also brought in a native to Virginia, an eastern black rat snake. I brought in a king snake, which is like a cousin to those guys, but they tend to be a little grumpier, a little grouchier. And then I brought in a ball python, which they're not giant snakes, but they are kind of heavy bodied for what they are. So they tend to be a little more intimidating to people, especially if in their minds these snakes are growing in size. So none of the snakes were very large, though I would imagine in the moment to the patient, I was pulling out a 20-foot long python. Really, I was pulling out a 3-foot long python, but in the moment, I know that it was feeling bigger for her.
Right.
So it was about an hour and a half long session. And what I did is I brought the snakes in these plastic sterilite tubs, which is just, it's a good way to travel with them. They have big enclosures here at the museum, but they travel well in these small tubs. And I made sure to bring tubs that were clear because I felt like if she could see the snakes while they were still locked away, that could be a good step one. And it proved to be true. So she was able to look at them knowing that they couldn't get out. And it it was it felt longer than maybe 20 seconds, but it was probably only about 20 seconds of an initial reaction. And then in just talking with the patient, really what I'm doing now, just kind of talking long form about what the animals were. I was telling her what they were and what they ate and what they did and how they were going to act. And essentially, I was educating her on the snake. I don't know that she was taking any of that in, but the idea was I was just filling the space with words. I was just kind of trying to keep a conversation going. Most of it was one sided, but I was trying to keep a conversation going. And um, after a few moments, she was okay with me taking the lid off. And then I was able to take out the first one that I took out was the corn snake. It's one of the most predictable snakes that I have. So I knew exactly what was going to happen, but they're also pretty active snakes. They're inquisitive, they're very intelligent. So they're not just going to sit there, they're going to want to move and explore. And none of it is quick, none of it is sudden, but it is persistent. They're just going to move around. So um, I opened the lid and the snake started to come up and over the lid. And again, nothing aggressive, but we had kind of, if the patient went from, the therapist was asking what number she was at in terms of her stress level. So I don't remember exactly what it was, but let's say she went from a 10 just being in the room with the snakes to after seeing them in the tubs, maybe she was down to like a 7. She was okay with me taking the lid off. All of a sudden she's back up to a 10 because the snake moved. Why did it move? Why is it moving? Why is it doing that? So then we just watched the snake kind of lazily move around the rim of the tub, not even really come out. And then once the number was down to around 7 again, I put my hand on the snake. I didn't lift it up, and everything was just broken down into small pieces. And within a few minutes, I mean, it was a total of about an hour and a half long session, but within a few minutes, I had the snake out and it was in my hands. The woman had touched the snake. I made sure that the head of the snake was back by me, but she was touching the body of the snake. We were talking the whole time. Again, I was kind of speaking as though I was giving a presentation or a class, knowing that most of that was just filling the space. But she was able to touch the snake. And then she was telling stories about her recent run-ins with snakes. She was very active. She would hike a lot, and there's a lot of opportunities for that in Central Virginia. So she was always outdoors. And in her mind, she was always one step away from a snake lunging at her. If there was an incident in her past where she had had a bad issue or run-in with the snake, I don't believe she shared it with me. And of course, that wouldn't be my place for her to share it with me. I didn't hear about an origin story of the phobia. It was just there and it was really deep with her. But at the same time, within a few minutes, she was fine with the snake being out, almost to the point of forgetting that it was out. Then we went down, we went through all of the tubs. The black rat snake, very similar to the corn snake. They're a little more active, a little more skittish. Nothing crazy, but it was definitely a different level of energy. And kind of the same thing. There was just a slight peak, but the peak of the black rat snake being a little more active, a little more fidgety. It wasn't nearly as high as when I first walked in the room with everything, not only in a tub, but I had a blanket over it. So she couldn't even see the snakes in the tubs. That was the absolute peak. If her highest stress level was 10, in that moment, it was probably a 20 because in her mind, she was imagining whatever her worst case scenario was. By the time that we get to the very end, which was the ball pythons are lovingly referred to as living pet rocks. That's kind of what they are. They just sit there as like a lump most of the time. But because they've got the name, the tag python, because they are heavier bodied, they always grow in your mind. They're much bigger in your mind than they really are in your hands. And by the end of it, she was just talking with her therapist about not even reptile or snake related stuff, just what she was going to do later that day. And it was just casual conversation. And there was a guy in the corner of the room holding some snakes, and she was able to touch most of them. She even held the ball python for a moment.
Oh,
Um, she was fine with it. And then when it came time, she didn't, she absolutely wanted to do it, but I could see that it was almost like she was remembering that she was supposed to be scared, because she was, with each step and with each next maybe level or layer of introduction to the snakes, her anxiety would rise just a little bit and then settle back down. So the very last thing that we did was I offered that if she wanted to, she could hold any of the snakes, but the most predictable one would have been the ball python, because it's just going to sit in your hands. It's not going to do anything else. Um, she did end up holding it, but when she leaned forward in the chair, I could see it was almost like she went, "Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be scared." And then she was shaking, and it wasn't an artificial reaction. I could see that it was genuine, but the it seemed like there had to be an intentional step to get into that mode. And she only held the snake for a moment, but that was still more than I think she ever thought she would do. And then I was just kind of hanging out with snakes in the side of a therapist office while she talked with the therapist. And it, to my ears, it just sounded like casual conversation. So it's interesting to see how quickly this massive phobia, which was built up with this woman for however long in her life, just sort of faded into the ether. The big breakthrough moment, really it wasn't so much this big impactful thing as it was the dissolving of whatever she had kind of created in her head. That's what it looked like to me anyway. It was overall, I think, a very positive experience. It was fun for me to see. I think that it was enjoyable for both, well, as enjoy maybe enjoyable is not the right word, but it was enjoyable enough for both the therapist and the patient, and it was a cool moment. I didn't get a follow up. I'm not really sure if I'm not sure what happened after that, but at least in the moment, I know that her experience was a positive
right, right. Well,
one.
it's that's a great description of exposure therapy. This is what we do with people who want to get over a phobia. A lot of people with OCD, we use exposure therapy. And the whole concept is taking the stimulus that causes them all this distress and slowly exposing them to it where their distress goes up. And then as they get used to the stimulus, their distress starts to go down. And then we do it to the next level and it goes up, and then it goes down, and then we go to the next level, just like you described. And that's how people get over the different phobias and even OCD type of concerns. So that's fantastic. Without people like you out there, that would be really hard to make that happen. So, you know,
Glad I can help.
yes. So I'm gonna throw out a couple teasers. I'm not gonna give the answers here, but I am going to share that if you visit Jake's museum, you will learn the difference between snakes and legless lizards, which I found to be really interesting.
It's
Uh,
a neat one.
you will learn something interesting about the eyes on the python that he has, the big python. There was another thing that I found really interesting, which was, you'll learn something about snakes and legs and things that I did not know about. He's got a great display that can tell us about that. So these are all teasers because they're really interesting facts about it. Um, so let me see here. So I do have Jake gave me sort of a video tour. We walked around the museum and he gave us sort of an overview of what's there. So I'm going to weave that into this particular video so viewers will get to see that. Tell us, other than snakes, what other types of animals do you have at the museum?
Okay, so we've actually got more lizards than we do snakes right now. We right now on display we've got just over 60 live species. That number will bump up probably by the peak of the summer, we'll have closer to 75 or 80. We've got a number of different turtles and tortoises. We've got a number of different lizards. About 60% of what's on display would be various types of lizards. We've got, of course, a number of different snakes as well. At this point, I've lost the exact count, but we've got lots of snakes here. In the future, we are hoping to add crocodilians to the list. So we have all of the permits in place for that. But in the state of Virginia, there's a few additional hoops to jump through. It's a slow process, but I do appreciate what the state is doing because they are not animals to be taken lightly. So I've had a chance to work with certain crocodilians before. They're very fun, but there's a lot to consider if you're going to have an alligator or crocodile of some sort in your building. So we're working towards that, but hopefully if people come out to visit the museum in the future, they'll be able to see that. Lots of different lizards. We have animals that if you would like to be hands-on with, you can be. We have some that that we definitely are not hands-on with, not because they're dangerous, but because not everything is meant to be held or touched. Some things are better to just look at and appreciate from a distance. And I think that's just as an important a lesson as it is to be able to pick up and handle something. Is we got to respect what the things are, and some things are better to just have as display. But yeah, lots of snakes, lots of lizards, a number of different turtles and tortoises, and hopefully at some point soon, a crocodilian or two. So we'll see how that goes.
And you've got an iguana there that, what would you say, estimate the weight of that iguana?
So he's only about 20 pounds, but he looks significantly bigger. He is a big green iguana. He's the largest green iguana I've ever seen. Most of the animals, in excess of 90% of the animals that we've got in the building and that we work with really at all, are rescues. So we are not a rescue, but we do like to work with and support rescues as much as we can. Our big iguana Bo has become sort of the unofficial main event of the whole museum. His original owners did a fantastic job with him. They conditioned him to a point that I didn't think iguanas could be conditioned. So he is by far the friendliest green iguana you'll ever see. But he was fed an unnecessary protein supplement when he was younger, which, because it hit during the biggest part of his growth spurt when he was younger, it supersized him. So he is not only the nicest iguana you will see, he is also by far the biggest. So he looks much bigger than 20 pounds. And when I've had to do more than just get in there and pet him and love him, when I've had to pick him up and move him and those claws sink into my skin, he feels like he's more than 20 pounds. But yeah, he's a big guy. If you guys come out here, we don't promise anything because it depends on the moods of the animals, and we always respect the animals first and foremost. But for those that are interested, we like for them to be hands-on with Bo because it's a really unique experience, and he's kind of the one.
Right. Well, estimate his length if you have a rough estimate, nose to tail.
Nose to tail. Nose to tail, he is probably just under, or maybe even just over 6 feet long. He's incredibly long. Most of that is tail, as it would be with most lizards. But he's a big guy. He's a big guy for sure. Most iguanas, most green iguanas, I should say, only get to be about a third of his size. So all of that comes down to being given a little too much protein when he was younger. We're anticipating having some additional complications when he gets older. So we're already kind of preparing and trying to do some preventative work to help ease him into old age, but that's decades from now. So for right now, he's just the biggest and friendliest guy. But yeah, he's probably right around 6 feet long in total.
Yeah. It really kind of shocked me when I saw him. I had not seen an iguana that big.
Yeah, me either.
So, all right. So let me kind of wrap up with this. If you are watching this video and you yourself, or you know someone who has a phobia or a fear or a concern about snakes or any sort of reptiles, and you have the opportunity to visit the museum, Jake is the guy to work with. He will, I'm sure, be gentle with you. He will help you just kind of learn about the animals, get exposed to the animals. And I promise you, you will have a great experience and you'll come out better educated and more comfortable than when you went in. So that's one thing I want to say. The second thing is, if you're a therapist and you have clients that you think would benefit from this, contact Jake, because if you're not where he is, maybe he knows some other people that can help you, but you know, he's in the world, he's in the field. So Jake, tell us, what's the name of your museum? Give us an address where people can come to, give us a website, and tell us how they can contact you.
All right. So the name of the museum is it's My Three Chambered Heart Natural History Museum. Our website is my3chamberedheart.org. We do have a Facebook page as well, which is where we tend to update most of our stuff. We're starting to add more and more programs and projects as we're getting into the warmer months, which gives us a little more flexibility. So if you guys are close to Central Virginia, or if you're planning a trip and you'll be passing by, we're pretty close to Richmond. So anyone that might be heading around the Richmond area throughout the summer, come stop by. We're going to have lots of cool things that we get into and play with in the warmer months that are maybe not always available year round. And then the address is 837 Cross County Road. So we sit in kind of a weird spot. The city might be listed as Mineral, Virginia, or it could be listed as Goochland, Virginia. There's a little bit of a dispute on that. We don't really know why. That's just how it pops up. But if you guys were to Google My Three Chambered Heart, we are going to pop up on Google. There will be there will be directions with Google Maps. So yeah, just check us out and kind of see some of the fun stuff that we're doing. What you might see with the montage of videos that'll be spliced in with this, you're just keep in mind, we've got lots of neat things here. We put the museum together in a way, I wanted all of the things that I felt were missing from other facilities, be it zoos or reptile collections. We wanted to kind of bring together here. We focus heavy on the science, but we try to make the science fun. But also keep in mind that this is phase one. We've got many plans in the future. So if you check us out now, keep an eye on us in the future too. In a few months, it might be a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit better. So just something to keep an eye out on, okay?
Fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and I appreciate you taking the time to do the in-person tour with me. And like I said, we're going to share that on this video as well. And you know, I cannot speak highly enough of Jake's knowledge and his ability to work with these animals. And you know, he's the guy that I would personally go to if I had anybody with phobias or concerns. And we're going to bring his video to some of the work that I do on my exposure project, which is rxxrt.com, prescriptionxrt.com, where you can see some of his snakes eating and feeding in 3D. So that's
So
exciting
cool.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Jake. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, today we're at My Three Chambered Heart in Goochland, Virginia, with Jake and Hendrix. Hello there, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We are going to take a look at some reptiles today. This is a reptile history, well, not history, but some history, but a reptile museum. And we're not going to give you the whole show because this is a business that we pay money for, but Jake's going to give us a sense of what's inside. So let's follow him as he tells us what he's got.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for joining. Yes, my name is Jake, and this is our reptile museum. Now you got me saying history. So in our first room here, this is what we call our What is a Reptile room. This kind of serves as a primer for the rest of what you're going to see in the building. Oftentimes people think that they're going to see big snake, little snake, and while we have both of those things, we've got a whole lot more too. So in this room, we touch on the relationship that dinosaurs have to reptiles. They're not the world's first reptiles, but probably the most famous. The relationship that birds play with reptiles, just a little spoiler, as of 3 years ago, birds now considered reptiles. And the first two live animals that you would see in our building are a pair of amphibians. If you guys come out here to visit us sometime, I'll be sure to tell you guys how amphibians fit into this reptile museum, okay? So we'll come around this way. Right through here, we enter into the world of testudines. Testudines being turtles, tortoises, and terrapins. Lots of cool things here, including the cool story of the Russian tortoise. He's hanging out back here. This is real life Master Oogway for fans of the animated movie Kung Fu Panda.
Nice.
The cool story behind his backdrop, I'll give you a quick little bit of that. The first vertebrates to go into space and come back alive. That's the key. Come back alive. A pair of Russian tortoises. So come on out here sometime. We'll talk about antifreeze blood. That's what those guys have.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah, so we walk around this way. We've got some more cool turtles and tortoises on display, including the friendliest snapping turtle you'll ever see. He is still a snapping turtle though, so we keep our fingers safe, but he's a neat guy. Come out here, we've got, they're kind of getting ready for bed for the night, but we do have our chameleons. One of them's hanging out there getting nice and warm, but we have, actually we've got 5 chameleons. We just added one. This one's brand new. We've got a female Jackson's chameleon. So with every visit, people are sure to see at least one of the chameleons eat. So if you've never seen them do the cool tongue thing in person and you want to see that, we can do that.
That's
okay?
pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. And our room back here, we represent the Crocodilian order of reptiles. We don't have a live crocodilian on the grounds yet, but it is coming, so stay tuned for that. That'll be a cool update one day. We wrap around this way. This begins the order of Squamata, which officially includes snakes and lizards. So one of the many weird things you'll learn here is that snakes are technically a modified type of lizard. If you ever wanted to know what makes a snake and a lizard different, we've got that featured here. But come on by and we'll tell you about that one time.
Cool.
So we'll wrap around this way because I left some stuff on the floor over there.
Sure.
This is where we start to enter the snakes. We've got some cool North American colubrids. Those would be your king snakes and corn snakes and such. We wrap around here and we see our cool garter snake right here. That is Orlando, a Florida blue-sided garter snake. Not only a venomous snake technically, but depending on what he ate last, he could also be poisonous. That's meant to be a cliffhanger.
That's a
neat
cool
thing.
story that you have to come and learn. I did not know that until you taught me that today.
It's a neat thing for sure. We've got some more cool snakes here, including probably the oldest rat snake you'll ever see. Dallas up here, our Texas rat snake, will be 24 years old this year. So that's considerably old for a rat snake. So come on out here. You might see that guy hanging out. In this room, we typically refer to this as our South America room. Lots of cool things in here. Probably the main event of the whole museum is Bo. He is our big friendly green iguana. Not only is he the biggest green iguana you'll likely see in person, but he's the friendliest. And he's so friendly that if you guys come here and you want to pet him, we can probably make that happen.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Where can you get that to happen other than here?
Probably nowhere safe, I will say that. So coming out around here, we do have a cool display right here.
I love this. I got to get a shot of this.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
This is a statue, a 14-foot long statue of a female king cobra. This is the middle of the average. They can get much bigger. The big feature here, and I'm very proud of this because I've not seen this done correctly anywhere else, including the Smithsonian. And that's friendly fire, Smithsonian people. King cobras are the only snakes known to build their own nests. So if you guys are seeing snake eggs in a nest, they did not build that nest. They ate whatever made that nest. So king cobras are the only snakes that make their own nests.
Wow.
Wrapping through here, we've got, in the middle of a meal, we've got Thor. He's our big Burmese python. Not the heaviest snake on display, but he is the longest one. So he's already 3 rats into a 5-rat meal. So he's going to work on those other 2 as the night goes on. But come visit Thor sometime, and I'll show you his legs. How about that? Oh yeah, we walk around here. So our Australian blue-tongued skink is tucked away for the night. But if you guys come out here to visit us and check us out sometime, I can tell you the cool story of the psychedelic mirror tongue of the blue-tongued skink.
Wow.
It's worth the price of admission alone.
I haven't even heard that one
yet.
yet.
Right back here, I'll follow you around here.
Okay.
We've got our mimicry wall, including the cool story behind the African egg-eating snake and the story as to why he spits up the eggshells. It's pretty cool.
Nice. Well, come on. I wouldn't want to eat eggshells either.
Oh yeah, they spit them right back up. A couple of cool lizards here. So all from various deserts throughout the world. You guys might notice and be wondering, why is the plexiglass so dusty? We have found that if we clean it, they don't see the barrier, so they crash into it. So it's not dusty because we're lazy. It's dusty because we don't want them crashing into the wall.
Excellent. Excellent.
In here, the lights have already gone out for the night, but this is our gecko room. One of the coolest features, I actually think it's the coolest science in the whole building, is the story behind the mourning geckos. That is an adult mourning gecko.
Wow.
They are very tiny, but they're very, very cool. So the most I'll tell you about these guys right now is that box right there with tiny geckos, plants, and dirt. That's real life Jurassic Park. But that's all you're getting from now. There's lots of cool things.
Nice teaser in there.
There you go. So we'll wrap back out around here. I know we're going through kind of quick. As of right now, we've got 60 individual species of reptiles on display in a number of different exhibits. We've got all sorts of things from snakes and lizards that you probably wouldn't want to touch. Maybe they're just display only. All the way up to the nice, friendly, common ball python. We've got some unique boa constrictors. All sorts of cool things here. So that's just a little bit of what you would see. This is also only phase 1 of the museum. So over the course of the next couple of months, we plan on not only opening up a second level to the building, but also introducing some outdoor tortoises to some really neat enclosures. So lots of cool things coming up. But yeah, that's what we've got for you right now.
All right, well, fantastic. This is a place, if you want to come and really get solid stories, Jake is the guy. He educated me on so many things, and I never knew these, my whole life, I never knew these stories, and it sounds like there's more that I need to come back for. So
Absolutely.
Jake, thank you so much.
Thank you.